Welcome to this Wise Owl Answers video. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you may have noticed something slightly different about this video compared to previous ones. In this video, you can actually see my face. Apologies by the way if you don't like it, don't worry, trust me, you're not the only one. And my face isn't going to appear for the entire video, just for this short introductory section. The reason we're doing this, by the way, is because we now have multiple Wise Owls making videos, so we thought it would be nice for you guys to be able to tell at a glance which Wise Owl you're getting when you first start watching. We're treating it as an experiment, so feel free to let us know in the comments below whether it's working or not. We'd love to hear what you think. Anyway, onto the question that's been asked. It isn't actually the same as the title of the video in this case. The original question came on a video about how to find web elements in Selenium, and what Jay wanted to know was why is it so impossible to scrape on a website called sofascore.com. The reason it turns out is because of the way that particular website loads its page content. When you first load the page, not all of the content gets loaded at the same time. It waits for you to scroll down the page until later content gets loaded. It's a feature you'll be familiar with from sites like Facebook, for example, where you scroll downwards and more content loads the further you scroll. I'd show you the example with my Facebook newsfeed, but the embarrassing lack of a social life would make that fairly pointless. So instead I'll just show you the site that Jay's interested in scraping. So this is the particular link that he gave me. So you can tell here from the scroll bar actually, if I just start scrolling down slowly by clicking on the down arrow, you'll see that the height of the scroll bar once I reach a certain point changes, indicating that, there we go, the page has just loaded a whole bunch of extra content. And it's the table that's sitting down towards the bottom of that page that Jay was interested in scraping. So we need some way, when we load that page, to scroll down until we get that table loaded. So we'll look at a few different techniques we could use in this video. To demonstrate some of the basic techniques for scrolling a web page, we're not actually going to start with the sofascore.com website. We're going to start with a much simpler site called the internet and the infinite scroll test page on there. If I right click into one of these blocks of text and choose to inspect it, we'll see in the elements page we get a list of div elements with the class jscroll- added, and there are two of those div elements at the moment. The further down I scroll through this page, however, the more of those div elements get added, and you can see those appearing in the elements list. So I've already written some basic code to get this to work, to fire up a new instance of Chrome and navigate to this page. The code I've written relies on the videos in the Getting Data from Websites playlist, so if you're not already familiar with the basics, then this is a good place to start. The workbook itself is basically empty. There's a single module in there with a simple subroutine, and all it's going to do is load a new instance of Chrome, navigate to the infinite scroll page, wait for 200 milliseconds, and then capture a reference to all of the elements with that class and write out the number of them into the immediate window. So if we just run this subroutine once and have a quick check back in the immediate window, when the page is first loaded, we get two of those div elements. One fairly simple way to scroll down the page would be to send the page down keyboard shortcut to the Chrome browser. So if I head back to the open instance of Chrome and press the page down key, you can see it scrolls down the page and loads more of these div elements. So to do that in VBA, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor. We'll need a new variable to hold a reference to an instance of the keys class. So let's say dim ks as selenium.keys. We'll then need to create a new instance of the keys class, which we can do in a couple of different ways. I think I'll do this just above the point where we set our Chrome driver. Let's say set ks equals new selenium.keys. What I'm then going to do is, after I've debug.printed the number of div elements I've found, I'm going to say cd.sendKeys and then say ks.pageDown. Just once should be sufficient to load a new div element. I'm then going to make the driver wait again, so I'm going to say cd.wait, and I'll go for 200 milliseconds again. And then I'm just going to do the same things I've done here. I'm going to capture a reference to all of the div elements with that class, and then or all of the elements with that class, and then count how many there are. So let's copy and paste those two lines, and then let's say divs when page scrolled one time. Okay, so having done that, we can clear the content of the immediate window and then run the subroutine, and this time we should see the page loads and then it scrolls, and it shows us that we've loaded the page with 2 elements, scrolled and loaded an extra element, so we have a total of 3. So the page down method works well enough, but it is a little inconvenient having to declare this extra variable to hold an instance of the keys class. So as an alternative, we could execute some JavaScript to achieve the same end results. There are several methods in JavaScript you can use to scroll a page. If I just head over to the Mozilla website, I've brought up a few of these help pages which describe the window.scrollBy method, the window.scroll method, and the scroll2 method. There are several other scrolling methods available as well, but they're non-standard and not supported by every browser, so I'm not going to cover those. I'm going to go back to the scrollBy method. This one allows you to scroll the document in the window by a specific amount. So it's like a relative scroll. It doesn't scroll to a particular position, but by a number of pixels, basically. So I'm going to just copy and paste a bit of code here to save writing it out myself, basically. I'm feeling a bit lazy. So I'm going to copy this window.scrollBy 0, window.innerHeight. So the 0 is the horizontal scroll and the window.innerHeight is the vertical scroll. That could just be a hard-coded number, but this will scroll by basically 1 page height using that property. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then I'm just going to comment out the send keys method, and then I'm going to say cd.execute script, and then after a space, in some double quotes, paste in what I've just copied from the Mozilla site. So window.scrollBy 0, window.innerHeight. It's quite important to remember that this code is case sensitive, which is why it's kind of useful to be able to copy it from the Mozilla site. So the capital B there is important, the capital H there is important. So be careful about that. I'm just going to run this subroutine now just to prove that it works, first of all, or check that it works, I should say. There we go. So we've seen that it's loaded and it has scrolled down. It did it a lot faster than the send keys method. You can see that we end up with the same end results. With the JavaScript method, there's also less need to wait. If I just go back and comment out the cd.wait line, I'm going to run this subroutine again. I'm just going to clear the contents of the immediate window. So let's run it again with the JavaScript method to scroll by. You'll see that the page loads and almost instantly scrolls down by a page. And if I have a look back at the end results here, you can see that I get 2 div elements when the page is first loaded and 3 immediately after it's scrolled, but without having to wait. If I just comment out the JavaScript method and then bring back the send keys method, you'll see this time if I clear the contents of the immediate window, when I run the subroutine, the scrolling is a little more sort of user-friendly. You can see there's like an animation, a smooth scroll happening. So it takes a little longer for the scroll to be completed. And if I head back to the Visual Basic Editor, you can see that because there was a delay in scrolling down before I tried to grab the set of div elements again, it hasn't actually detected the next one that's been loaded. So there's, I guess, a small advantage there with the JavaScript method because it doesn't scroll smoothly. We don't need to perform this extra wait. So let's head back to comment out the send keys method and then bring back the JavaScript method. Now it is actually possible to introduce a smooth scrolling effect even using the scrollBy method. Let's just copy and paste this execute script line and then comment out the original one. Then I'm just going to clear out what's inside the round brackets here and then head back to the Mozilla help page for the scrollBy method and have a look at the using options section. So inside the scrollBy method, we can pass in a dictionary containing multiple different options of a top, left, and a behavior parameter or property. So let's copy that, including the curly bracket symbols there, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then paste that in. It makes a little bit of a mess, of course, because I can't split this across multiple lines without using a continuation character in VBA. I prefer just to have all of this back onto a single continuous line. So let's just tidy things up a little bit by getting rid of any of these new line characters, and then everything should go back to a single continuous line. Okay, the order of the parameters is a bit different this time, so we've got the top scroll and then the left scroll rather than the horizontal and then the vertical. And I want to make sure that the vertical scroll, the position of the top, is set to the window.innerHeight property again. So let's copy and paste that and replace the number 100. And then if I just clear the contents of the immediate window and run the subroutine again, let's leave the weight off. Let's see if we still get the same effect. So we'll see the page loads. You can see that slightly smoother scrolling effect this time rather than the instantaneous one from last time. And again, because we haven't weighted, we didn't actually capture the extra element that's been loaded. So let's reintroduce the wait for 200 milliseconds and then run the subroutine again. And this time we'll hopefully find that we do indeed get the extra element detected. If you wanted to scroll quickly to the bottom of the current page, you could use a different combination of JavaScript methods and properties. Just heading back to the Mozilla website there, if we have a look at the window.scroll and the window.scroll2 methods, these are functionally identical. There's a little hint actually on both of these help pages that window.scroll is effectively the same as this method, and on the window.scroll page, window.scroll2 is effectively the same as this method. So it really doesn't matter which of the two you choose to use. Just to demonstrate the basics of this, I'm actually going to go back to the Visual Basic Editor. I don't have the option that I actually want to copy from the help on these pages. If I head back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm going to copy and paste the original execute script method. So I'm going to paste that in just below, comment out the previous execute script, and then I can use either scroll or scroll2. I think it's simpler just to use scroll. So the horizontal scroll I don't want to be anything, so leave that set to 0. But this time, rather than using the window.innerHeight, what I'm going to do is say document.body.scrollHeight. And again, that capital letter H there is all important. This won't make a huge difference in terms of the final output for this particular site, but it will have a bit of an impact when we go back to the sofascore.com website shortly. So just to demonstrate that this one works, if I just clear the contents of the immediate window and then run the subroutine, although it won't be significantly different, it's kind of difficult to tell that anything here is different at all, we have still captured that extra div element that was loaded. When you have an infinitely scrolling page like the one we're using here, you may want to perform a number of scrolls before you finally capture the content of the page. One fairly simple way to do that, of course, would just be to copy and paste the line which causes the scroll to happen. But that's fairly inelegant, and a much better way would be to write that inside a loop, so you could control more easily how many times that action happens. Just to demonstrate the basics of that, I'm sure you guys know about looping already, but let's create a really simple for next loop. I'm going to say dim I as integer at the top of my subroutine, and then after I've printed out how many divs I've found when the page was loaded, I'm going to say for I equals 1 to 5. So we'll just loop 5 times in this case. We're going to execute the script to scroll down and then wait for 200 milliseconds and then recapture the number of JScroll added class div elements before we write out how many divs we've got. And once we've done that, we'll move on to the next counter. So we'll say next I just below there. I'm just going to indent all of the code inside that loop. And then to make it a little easier to see what's going on here, rather than divs when page scrolled 1 time, let's break that part up and concatenate the value of I into the debug.print statement. Okay, so we'll clear the contents of the immediate window and then we can run this subroutine. And we should see the page loads and then it will scroll, hopefully, multiple times reasonably quickly. And each time it's scrolled, it tells us how many div elements it has found. Okay, so now let's get on to the point of the original question. How do we get this table from the bottom of that page on the sofascore.com website? I'm going to head back to the open page I have, and then I'm going to copy and paste the URL from the address bar, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and replace the reference to the internet website. Okay, so we've got the correct web page there. The next thing I need to do is find out how to reference the table I'm interested in, and I suppose I should also update my my variable here. It's not really a divs element anymore, is it? It's going to be a table element. So let's change divs here to tbls, tibbles. I'm still going to try to capture multiple elements just to prove we're not necessarily going to be able to refer to the table the first time we load the page. Then I'm just going to replace all of the references to a divs in my code. I should have just used a find replace to do this. I'm sure you can do this in a much smarter way than I've just done it. Okay, so I've replaced all the divs with tbls. Then just for the time being, I'm going to comment out the loop here, which handles the scrolling. So let's just comment all of that out. Okay, we need to find a way to reference that particular table. So let's head back to that page. And if I start scrolling down again, we should see on the scroll bar here, it eventually loads the next section of the page. And all the way down here at the bottom, I could right click into any cell in that table and choose to inspect it and see if there's a handy way to reference it. So it's got a pair of classes here, so compound classes, beginning with table styles. So let's double click on that there, copy that to the clipboard, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then replace the jscroll-added with the first class here, so dot table styles all the way down to the -8. And then the second class there, let's replace the space with a full stop character to create that compound class for the CSS selector. Okay, so at that point, I think we should be able to run this code and find that we don't have any tables with that pair of classes assigned to it. So let's just quickly check that. If we run the subroutine, we get that page loaded. And if we have a look back at the immediate window, indeed, we haven't captured a reference to any of those tables. Okay, now let's reintroduce one of our scrolling methods and see if we can capture a reference to the table then. I'm going to go with the last option we used in the previous example, the one that instantly tries to scroll to the bottom of the entire scrolling region of the page, using the scroll height property. So I'm just going to uncomment that line which executes that script, the one with the weight, then recapturing a reference to the tables and the debug.print statements, but I'll keep the loop commented out. Of course, I'll also need to make sure I update the class I'm searching for here, so let's just copy and paste that from the previous line and get rid of the jscroll-added. And if we run this subroutine now, we should see that we load the page and then instantly scroll to the very, very bottom. And hopefully you can see, if I switch back quickly to the Visual Basic Editor, that that doesn't actually capture a reference to that table. And the reason for that is that because we scrolled instantly to the bottom of the page, we didn't actually hit the trigger point for the loading of the next set of data. So if you keep an eye on the scroll bar as I scroll upwards bit by bit, this is the point at which that last table should appear, but it's clearly not there. Keep watching the scroll bar. If I get up a little further, we will hit that trigger point, and it's just loaded all of the extra content, and including that table at the very bottom, the one that we wanted. So clearly, scrolling instantly to the bottom of the page this time isn't a sensible option. One way we could solve this problem is to introduce the smooth scrolling behavior to the scroll method. And we can do that in basically the same way we did with the scrollBy method earlier. So I'm just going to copy and paste little bits of that method and replace parts of the scroll method. So let's change the first part so that its top is document.body.scrollHeight. And then I think I can just copy and paste wholesale everything after the inner height property on the previous line. Okay, so the wait of 200 milliseconds should be enough for this. Let's give it a whirl. If we run the subroutine again, we'll get a new instance of Chrome and we'll scroll down the page this time, but you can hopefully see that it's done that with the smooth scrolling effect, so you can actually see it happen, and that table clearly has loaded. So if we have a look back at their page, maybe we didn't quite wait long enough. Let's just introduce a slightly longer wait. Let's go for 500 milliseconds. Let's just prove that this is actually working. If we run the subroutine again, we'll smoothly scroll to the bottom of the page, and hopefully this time we'd have indeed captured a reference to that table. Now that's all quite nice and it's working clearly. We've got access to the table we want, but it's just a little unnecessary. If we wanted to force that table to be loaded, I think the bare minimum we would need to do, if we head back to the open example on that page, I'm just going to close down the Elements window with the developer tools and just refresh the page so it loads again. So the table that I want isn't actually loaded just yet. If I scrolled down by one page height, if I just press the page down key, keep an eye on the scroll bar again, you should see hopefully that's sufficient to get that table and the extra content to load. So really, we only need to scroll down by one page height to get access to that table. So heading back to the Visual Basic Editor, although this execute script line is quite nice and fun to watch, it's just a little unnecessary. Let's comment that one out. We could reintroduce our keyboard shortcut again using the keys variable or the ks variable, but I think the easiest thing to do here is just reintroduce the execute script scroll by the window's inner height. So if we clear the contents of the immediate window and then just run that subroutine again, we'll hopefully see we scroll by one page height, which is sufficient to load the rest of the content on the page, and that's sufficient to give us access to that table. I suppose just to finish off the video, it would make sense to actually write that table's contents out onto a new worksheet. So that's fairly straightforward once we've captured a reference to it. So we have our TBLs variable, let's say TBLs, open some round brackets and just refer to the first item in that collection. We can then say as table, and then we can say to Excel, or I can attempt to say that, let's try it again, to Excel, and then we can specify the target for that data. So let's say this workbook.worksheets.add.range A1. So that's going to create a brand new worksheet and write the contents of the table starting in cell A1 on the new sheet. Just to tidy things up, let's get rid of the next line, the debug.print line. Let's get rid of the other execute script methods that we don't need, the rest of the loop. Let's uncomment these, outdent these lines so everything's at the same correct outdent level. And then we could also get rid of the other debug.print statement and the set TBLs line initially there as well. Okay, so a much more succinct, shorter subroutine. I suppose we should just tidy up the keys variable there as well, as we don't need that, and the integer variable, that's not required. Much better, much neater and tidier. So, having done all of that, let's run the subroutine one more time. And we should see, we get the page loading, we scroll down by one page, which should be enough to load that page. We've ended up with a new worksheet in the workbook, and if we have a look back at that worksheet, we have a bunch of data about well, what is it about? It's about the Indian Super League. There we go. I should have spotted that right at the start. There we go. So hopefully that's enough to answer the original question. I think it's probably a little more than was really needed. The page down key, I suppose, is really all you need. But hopefully that's a bit of extra background information for you about scrolling web pages and why you need to. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.